The inappropriate Eddie.
So, Eddie, that Knicks game. Oh my God.
It was Sunday.
No, Sunday night.
It was Sunday.
They were losing, and I was like, fuck this shit. I shut it off. And then I wake up in the morning, and they won. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that's what they've been doing. Like the first game, they should have never lost, but they lost that. So I've sat there, and I'm using the things I learned, right, from self-healing. So I reframe this whole thing, right? So before I was getting all this anxiety and stress about it. And I'm like, look, end of the day, we've surpassed what we were supposed to do this season. Right? Yeah. We beat the champions. So I'm like, it's a win. Obviously, as New Yorkers, we're greedy and we want more. But I had to take a step back. I'm like, we're doing way better than anybody expected us, right? Anything else that happens after this is cool.
Take it away.
Bringing the girls out?
No, I'm putting them back in.
When I came in, her boobs are right up, and I was like, boobies!
I am Eddie, also known as Eddie with a Y on my online social media streets. I am a father, an annoying husband, an annoying brother, a begrudging coach, also a very proud Haitian American. So that pretty much sums me up.
We love Eddie.
I've heard this before.
Were you the one that taught us how to play spades? I don't know. I remember playing spades in college. I don't know. Somebody taught us. Who taught us, Sam?
Me. I know you guys taught me.
Us.
I don't know. I miss it.
Shelly taught us, right?
Did we start in high school?
Started in high school. Yeah, you're right. We all probably came knowing. Never mind.
Not me.
I remember us doing it in high school.
Susanna
we definitely did in high school.
Brother,
I learned from my Stony Brook cronies.
I think I learned from Shelly.
Shelly,
I think, introduced it to us.
Remember we used to be in the suite and just play spades with alcohol and not do anything else? There were times we did that.
Are you sure we didn't do it because Skippy Lou was always there?
She was? Yo, you can't call her Skippy Lou online, Samantha. That's our private nickname.
All right. Who is this Skippy Lou?
We're not going to say her name. Me and Samantha know who Skippy Lou is. So do you want to know how Skippy Lou got her name?
Yep. Yes, sir.
So one day...
She didn't chill with us in college. So
no, she definitely
played in high school.
But no, I started hanging out with Skippy Lou after high school.
See, the timelines are blending.
In any event, I used to hang out with this girl that we'll call Skippy Lou. And my sister is very cold-blooded. Any girl that I would bring in my vicinity, she was quick to judge, right?
Including me.
Samantha, too. Yeah, she didn't like Samantha at first, too. Didn't like her face.
Ooh, gotta hear that story.
So then later on, my sister, like after Skippy Lou left or whatever, she was just like, who's that girl? And I'm like, oh, just a friend from high school that, I went to. She was like, yo, what's up with her Skippy Lou's? And I looked at her and I'm like, and do you know, after that, I couldn't really hang out with her the same way anymore because all I kept on seeing was Skippy Lou and my freaking sister's stupid comments. So that's how she got the nickname Skippy Lou, because she wore Skippies. My sister's mean and she called her Skippy Lou. That's how she got her name. And Samantha's still calling her that, which is kind of foul. Be better, Samantha.
Tell us a little bit about how you identify with your culture, racial identity. Give us a little background.
So growing up, right? So for those of you that don't know, I am Haitian American, right? So my mother and father were Haitian, and I was actually born in Brooklyn, New York. And for probably a short period of my time, I was there in Brooklyn, right? And while I was there was a lot of Haitians. So it was cool. It was like a great environment to be around because I grew up with a lot of Haitian people. Then around 4th or 5th grade, I moved to the Bronx. And that was like a big culture shock, which is because this was the first time I was in an environment which was actually good because there was a whole bunch of different people. There were Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, early in my block, there was like Irish people there. There was all types of different people. So I grew up with a lot of people. Didn't grow up with a lot of Haitians. So it was something that it changed my identity to a certain degree because when I first grew up in the Bronx, there weren't a lot of Haitians. And then the Haitians that people would talk about was always in a negative connotation. So I'd get made fun of because I was Haitian. So it was something I struggled with, especially like growing up in the neighborhood I did. And then in high school, like I told you guys before, I later found out all these people that I knew that I thought were just like Black Americans or Jamaicans, I later found out that they were Haitian. So that was actually really, really cool because there were a lot of the popular kids in school. And I'm like, wait, you're Haitian? They're like, yeah, I'm Haitian too. But back then, it wasn't something that you really sat there and talked about because you get made fun of. It's not like now where it's just like you see Haitian flags all over the place and people are really happy to be that. And so for me, it was a struggle. It wasn't like I denied it, but I was ashamed of it initially because people would make fun of it. So I remember one day coming home to my mom and explaining to her like what was happening in terms of people making fun of me about being Haitian. And she's the one that's really sat there and helped me identify with my culture more, because especially because I wasn't in Brooklyn anymore and I wasn't around Haitians. Like I had to be reintroduced to who we were. And she was just like, she was basically saying, she was like, you need to be very proud of who you are. She was just like, we're Haitians. We're the ones that basically freed ourselves from, you know, the colonizers and the slave masters. And we basically set the events for all other islands to sit there and fight against, you know, slavery and all that thing. And she was just like, you have the blood of fighters, right? And so that really kind of changed my perspective about that. Because prior to that, it was, you know, like I said, when I lived in Brooklyn, we were all Haitians, so it wasn't really a big deal. I had to re-identify with myself. And it was really because of that conversation with my mom. So for me, I'm always proud to say that I'm Haitian. I always mention it, especially of recent, where things are being said about us. So I'm very, very proud of that. And I always mention that to other people. And now it's a lot more acceptable to be able to say that. And what's great about social media is that you find so many other Haitian people, and a lot of the experiences I went through as a child with my mom, because I always used to think she was crazy and overprotective. And then you watch all these other social media videos from Haitian comedians. And I'm like, I told my sister, I'm like, oh, we weren't alone. There were other people that had crazy Haitian moms like this too. But like I said, because we grew up in the Bronx and we didn't have a lot of other Haitian people, I didn't really know that other people struggle with the same things I did, like that my mom, you know, used to put us through from that standpoint. So it's something that I learned later on in life. And I'm so happy for social media because I realized that, like, oh, my trauma wasn't just my own trauma. I was like, apparently it just happens in a lot of Haitian families that the way this is how, you know, your relationships are with your mom. So that's my little story in terms of like how I identify. I identify as a Haitian man first, obviously a Black man, because that's just, you know, that's what I show visibly, right? Like as soon as someone sees me, I walk into a room, big Black guy, right? And all the judgment that comes with that, whether earned or not. So that's something I'm very, very proud of and identify with, and always pump with my kids. You know, obviously they're multiracial, right? Like, you know, they're Dominican, Haitian, Puerto Rican, and I always emphasize to them that you have a great mixture of all these cultures, but being a Black, you're going to be viewed mostly as Black when you step into these spaces and what that comes with, right? So I know I carry a lot when I walk into a room being, you know, a Black person. So any environment that I'm in, I know that the eyes are on me for better or for worse. So that's kind of how I identify myself and have no issue with it.
Can you tell us how that impacted your work environment and what you do or what you have done, and how that affected you in corporate or in your systems you've worked in?
Yeah. So because I ended up in marketing, right? Like when I went to school, I went to Hunter College. I was supposed to go to Stony Brook with Samantha and you guys.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I was supposed. Oh, so you know that story? Yeah. So
Oh,
I applied to Stony Brook and a couple of other colleges. Stony Brook put me on a waiting list. And I'm like, I can't really wait around for this. So I ended up going to Hunter College. And then by the time they said like, hey, we accepted you, I had already made the decision that I'm going to Hunter College, which this all works into this whole story, right? So ended up not going to Stony Brook, went to Hunter College. And during that time, initially I went there for becoming a physical therapist because I heard that that was like a real hot thing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Quickly realized that science and math aren't really my thing. So I had to sit there and I took like sociology classes and psychology classes, and those things really spoke to me. Like I really enjoyed that stuff. I mean, you know, you guys I've spoken to, so you know where I'm into all that stuff and looking at people and understanding them and how that applies to your own life. So I was there I switched my major into sociology. I was thinking about becoming a social worker. Again, had a
I didn't
realization.
know that either. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
girl, that's all. See, you're learning a lot. This is why
Yeah.
we do this, right? But yeah, so then I was just like, all right, I think I'm going to become a social worker. I love sociology. I love talking to people. I'm a pretty good listener. But then I started realizing that with sociology, it's not like how, you know, I have my conversations with Shelly and Marcellis and Samantha and stuff like that. It's very different where you have to sit there, listen to people and kind of help them make their own decisions, where I know I'm the type of person, especially if I care about you, where I'm probably going to be like, this is stupid. You shouldn't do this, right? And I just knew that's why I couldn't be a good social worker, which is why I'm always amazed with Melissa and Marcelli's, where like I'm hearing about Marcelli's sessions and I'm just like biting my tongue because I'm like, what did you say? She was just like, no, I just had to help her get to that point. And I was like, see, I made the right decision. So during that time, the internet was bubbling, right? It was this hot thing that was happening. This is the first time we started using email. And I was just like, wow, this thing is really, really exciting. Like I had my little AOL account. I started getting my own little computers. And I was just like, I think this is going to be the wave of the future. And I just remember there were times where like when my friends would go hang out and stuff like that. And obviously I would hang out, right? You guys would see me sometimes. But a lot of times I'd be locked in the lab, aka my basement, just sitting there learning how to build a website, learning HTML, learning about marketing. And that actually led to my corporate career. Right. So because I knew how to create like a website and I had experience with the internet and marketing, I was able to land a couple of roles. What first was it was what do you call that? A staffing agency because they were building their own websites. So I was like their kind of like their e-recruiter at first. And then from there, I ended up in New York Life. So New York Life Insurance Company, I was there as a webmaster. So back in the days before everyone can just create their own websites, you had someone that would sit there and upload stuff and change things. And they were known as webmaster. So I was there as an assistant webmaster. And that was my first foray into like real corporate America. Like I had other jobs before, but they were very different than like official, like Fortune 100 corporate America. And I remember going into that space, and because I was in marketing, there wasn't a lot of me there, right? Like anytime I would walk into a meeting, it was me and maybe some women there, but there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me there, right? So me being a kid from the Bronx that moved and thought very, very differently, it was a big culture shock to me initially, right? Like I had some kind of like training because of like, you know, the Caribbean parents teaching you like, hey, you know, this is how you move and this is how you approach people and stuff like that. So I had somewhat, but I didn't really understand the whole world of corporate America. I always tell people corporate America is like the Matrix. It's like this whole different world where things that are not acceptable in the neighborhoods I grew up in are totally acceptable in corporate America. And I had to sit there and kind of train my brain. So initially it was a little rough. Like I could do the work, right? Like I knew that stuff, but maneuvering the corporate politics and feeling comfortable being a Black person in this space, that took some time, right? Because I was so used to being in the Bronx and working those jobs where there's like, you know, tons of Latin and Black people and a whole bunch of other different people. This is the first time I was in a space where it's predominantly white people, predominantly white men, obviously, right? There wasn't that many white women that were in positions of high power there either. So it was very intimidating for me at first. This is before I had to learn how to just like accept that this is who I am and I need to feel confident with it, right? Like I can't shrink because I'm in an unfamiliar environment. So there was a guy that initially, like that later came to work in my same department, my buddy Jaleel, who I have these deep conversations that we all have. And initially, you know, I was looking at him and I was like, because, you know, well, one, he really did the corporate thing really, really well. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, is he, you know, and I hate saying this, right? We shouldn't say this because, you know, we're all different. But I was looking at him, I'm like, is he a sellout? Because I'm like, the way he was moving, I was like, yeah. So then one day I was sitting there talking to him, and then I found out like, oh, he's from Mount Vernon. And I'm like, oh, wait. And it was like, you know, which is like right near the Bronx. So for people that don't know where Mount Vernon is, it's like a suburb of New York, but that's considered a little more hood because there's more people that look like me there, right? So, and then I later found out that his father was Mr. Dawson, which was a math teacher in me and Samantha's high school. So we formed this bond there. And he was just like, oh, I reached out to my dad and I told him about you. And I'm like, your dad saved me in algebra because I was failing it and he passed me. And I'm always going to be thankful for your dad about that. So we built a relationship based on that, you know, our neighborhoods. And then I remember him just sitting there and explaining to me how to maneuver this, right? Because I just wanted to go there, do my job. I didn't want to sit there and do the small talking and the stuff that I was seeing that I felt was really fake. Because again, I was raised in the Bronx. We don't really do all this fake talking stuff and acting different and things like that. So it was really weird to me. And I was telling him, like, dude, I'm just going to do my work and I should be rewarded for that. And he used to tell me, he was just like, Eddie, he's like, yo, that's not how this works. And I'm like, because in my mind, I'm building something too. This is something else that's happening, right? Because I know this internet thing, like I'm using those skills to build my own business. So I had like a side business as I'm working in New York Life. And I'm like, look, this is just like a means to an end, dude. Like I just need this money so I could sit there and keep investing in myself, building my skills and building this business that I wanted to do. Because my biggest goal was to work remotely, which is now a big thing, right? People used to make fun of me and think, they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. It's never going to happen. I'm like, with technology, we should be able to work from home. There's no reason for us to be commuting in the city. I was Nigrodamus, and I predicted this before it all happened. Okay. I was on it. Nigrodamus. Let it marinate in your soul. Okay. All right. So I was way ahead of my time. This is what I was looking for, right? I saw the future before it happened. So my buddy Jaleel used to tell me, he was just like, Eddie, he was like, that's cool, right? Like, I get it. Like, you're not trying to really move up the corporate ladder, blah, blah, blah. But he was just like, but doesn't it make sense to make more money if you can by just making some slight adjustments? And I'm like, I don't need their money. I'm literally here for a check to kind of do what I need to do. And he was like, yeah, but Eddie, he's like, that's dumb. He was just like, you could make more money, move up, and it help you reach your goal a little faster if you're able to play the game. So I'm like, and I was watching him because he started moving up. He was making more paper and stuff like that. And he didn't really change who he was. Like, I would just watch him in meetings and how he would sit there and interact with these folks and how much they loved him and things like that, right? Because I was still used to like mean mugging people and stuff like that. Like, I was still on the train or in the Bronx and things like that. And I would see like Jalil's out here smiling, being really personable, sitting there talking about sports. So I studied a lot of what he did. And I also listened to what he said finally. Like, I have to stop being so hard-headed and like so Bronx focused and just worried about my own thing. Watching him maneuver around that space, like especially around a bunch of white men, and how comfortable he was, it helped me learn how to maneuver around that space too, and be able to walk into meetings and not feel like, oh my God, I shouldn't be here, or I'm the only person here. It was, for a while, it was very difficult for me to be around spaces where we weren't in there, right? Like, I would walk in there, because the problem is that, not a problem, that's just the way it is. Is that when I walk into a space, because I'm 6'4", I'm the dark guy, immediately eyes go on me, right? So, and it could be, right, because I remember, someone saying that, like, oh, Eddie, it's because you're tall. I'm like, yeah, I know the difference between the look of you're tall versus like, why is this guy here? Should he be here? And all these other looks, right? Which is funny because even my kids, like, as they grew older, when I would walk into restaurants and things like that, because I'm so used to it now, I'm oblivious to it. Like, I just would look past it. They would ask me, they're like, hey, Daddy, like, why does everybody stare at you? I'm like, oh, because I'm the big black guy, right? Like, yeah, it's going to be one of those things that you're going to see. Anytime I move into a space, you're going to see. And part of it, and I also told him, I'm like, part of it also is because your daddy's like really tall. So, it's going to draw attention. In any event, like, I learned how to be in those corporate rooms and feel way more comfortable. When I first got there, it wasn't that case. I still felt like I was an outsider. I'm just this kid from the Bronx, this Haitian immigrant that, I'm like, I don't really know what they feel about me, what they think about me. And I was too concerned about that, actually, right? Like, I had to learn, like, and Jalil was really helpful in that. He's like, you don't really care what they think about you. You know what you're talking about. Because that was the other thing too. As I got more knowledge about internet marketing, because I got promoted, right? I went from a assistant webmaster, and then eventually I became like their first internet marketing director, because I was bringing so much knowledge about like SEO and search engine optimization. And all of that was because of the stuff I was doing on the side, which was really my first goal. So I used what I was learning to kind of help them. And it also propelled me to a higher position, which is what Jalil said, and more money, right? Like, I started having people under me. I could walk into meetings. They all knew who I was and stuff like that. I learned how to do, which I didn't know at the time what it was, code switching, to sit there and be able to have conversations with them. Even like, and the weird things that happen with code switching is, it's just like, you take a little more of the bass out of your voice, right? You're sitting there and you're smiling a little more so that they're not intimidated by you, right? Like, because they're afraid of you and stuff like that. And so I started learning how to do that. And at first, it took a lot of effort, but now it's just like, it's almost like automatic. It's like almost putting like a cape on when you need to, right? And that's basically what happens. And I don't even think about it anymore. I think when I first started corporate America, I was very conscious of, like, when I walk into a room, I'm like, damn, everyone's staring at me. Do I need to be here? Like, I was like, should I be here? And then eventually, like, I just got more confident. And I got the confidence because, one, my mentor, and two, because I knew what the hell I was talking about. Like, this was all new to them, right? They didn't really understand the internet. They didn't understand about search and optimization. I did. So it made me feel way more confident being in those spaces. Whereas if I didn't have that, I think I would still be shrinking. So it allowed me to feel more confident. And eventually, like, as I moved on in my corporate career in different jobs, I started showing more of the real Eddie with a Y, and not so much the corporate Eddie. So they'd get more of a mix. But that came with years, right, of being in that environment, also learning about yourself and realizing that, like, look, at the end of the day, you know what you're talking about. You don't have to sit there and prove yourself to anybody else. You have to own the space when you're in there, because people are going to treat you the way you carry yourself, right? So if I'm shrinking and not really confident, they're going to look at you that way and they're going to treat you that way. And in corporate America, you don't want that, right? Because I'm like, they'll sit there and basically chew you up and throw you out, right? What I realize is that I'm really good at making relationships with people, which, you and I have all talked about this, right? For a person that I don't think I'm very friendly looking or friendly, people love me and my personality. So I learned to leverage that and use that in corporate America, where I'm like, what I realize is it's not so much what you do and how good you are, it's if people like you. And Jalil used to tell me that all the time. He was like, Eddie, this is just a game, right? He was just like, that's all it is. It's just a game. And you just have to be willing to play it to get what you want, right? Like, don't sit there and think that, because I thought I was giving up a part of myself by playing the game. He was like, no, he was just like, you're just here to play the game, to get what you need out of it, and to build what you want to build out of it, which eventually I did, right? Like, I was eventually able to leave New York life and start my business and, be with my daughter the first 5 years. Marcellus was able to like quit her job for that time frame. And that was like one of the best time frames in our lives, right? Where we were able to sit there and basically just do whatever we wanted to. So I was still able to achieve that and learn a lot about corporate America and be able to use that. And I still use it to this day in my employment. So that's my story about corporate America and how I had to kind of maneuver around it, if that answers your question.
Yeah. But I think also we want to acknowledge the terms code switching and playing the game and all the things, and also the cultural and the racial piece of it, of belonging in spaces where we belong, or like when you said you belong in certain spaces, you belong in them. It has nothing to do with anything, but it does. I mean, let's be honest. It happens all the time. And so when people throw terms like affirmative action, it's really funny because it's the opposite. People of color usually work 10 times harder to get that spot. It's not what this narrative of you're just handed this spot because you're this ethnicity or this race. So all of these things, what people don't realize, especially, with my work with all professionals of color, all the things that really go on behind the scenes and the feelings. And when people start to have their spiritual awakenings or they hit their 40s and they start to evaluate their life, it's like, I don't want to play the game anymore. Not to say that you shouldn't at 20 something or 30 something, but there's this authenticity that kind of takes over. And it's like, this is bullshit, but it's a paycheck. It pays your mortgage, so there's this like thing going on.
You find a balance, right? Like you hit it on the head. Like I always laugh at the conversation of recent, if you guys are watching this podcast around this time, about DEI and affirmative action. I'm like, I find it hilarious because in the spaces I would be, there would be one or two of us, right? Like myself and my buddy Jalil, right? And Jalil's education was way higher than mine. He was a Penn graduate, right? He was part of these programs that help, kind of prepare you for this stuff. But he got to the places that he did because he had like a pedigree and an education higher than some of the guys that were above us, right? So, and that's something else that I always find amusing, because that's something like, I remember that conversation vividly with my mom, right? As I started coming up, I remember her telling me, she was like, Eddie, you're always going to have to work 10 times harder than some of your counterparts that, that happen to be white or some other colors and things like that. She was just like, because there always going to be this perception of you as less than, right? Like you don't belong here. You're not enough. So for me, part of that, I was already raised with that, just being in a Haitian Caribbean family. Like we're already taught, like, look, just work hard. Don't worry about anything else. Like there wasn't because there's not this lack of acknowledgement that this stuff is out there. Just in my family, and I think in most Caribbean and just most immigrant families, we're just like, we don't care what the whys are and how they may impact us. We just know that, like, look, we do what we do. We're going to get what we're going to get. And that's it. There's no excuses for it. We acknowledge that it's there, but there's no excuse for it. So like, that's the way I came up, where even in that environment, I knew that I'm like, look, all right, I'm uncomfortable. I know this doesn't feel right and this is weird, but I've been trained that you still got to make things happen, right? And so when I hear like the whole DEI and affirmative action, I'm like, dude, I'm always already, and I always had to work harder than everybody else, because that's something I was already trained to do. So it wasn't anything new to me. It was really more trying to feel comfortable in the space. And like you said, Melissa, as I got older, I cared less about feeling comfortable or making other people feel comfortable and trying to fit into that space. I was still professional, but I showed more of my personality. Like I didn't feel like I needed to wear this mask as much, because as you just get older, I don't want to say you don't care, but you just become more comfortable in yourself. And it's more one of those things where, like, look, if you don't like me or you have a problem with me because of, my skin color or whatever, I'm like, that's your problem. It's not for me to hold. And that's something I think I had to learn over time. I'm not holding this. You hold this. I'm just going to sit there and be the best version of myself. If you like me, cool. If not, that's fine too. I'm still going to do what I need to do. But again, I think that comes with maturity, experience, confidence. Mm-hmm. Self-help, like reading those books and talking to your friends that are going through that same processes too. I think that's what sits there and changes. Like, because I'm like, the person that I came into corporate America and who I am now is way, way different, way different, because I view things very differently. So I do laugh when I hear about, like, you know, I was like, if you, clearly you haven't been in the spaces I've been, because there's not a lot of us there. And the folks that are there, like I said, they had like exceptional freaking educational backgrounds and had to do a ridiculous amount of stuff to get there. Whereas there's some people that I knew there, I'm like, well, how'd you get here? Oh, my dad is like the AVP of the company and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Right? Yeah. So, yeah. So I find that very interesting when people mention that. I was like, clearly I don't think they've been, well, obviously they've not been in our shoes, so they don't understand how this works, but people aren't just giving us jobs because you check off the box that you're black. I was just like, trust me. I was just like, they will filter you out immediately in these environments. Like, that's not going to last just because you pick this box. Right. So yeah, that's my thought process.
And also what you were seeing and probably still seeing is the lack of promotion to like the high. You know, you can make it to the middle road management, but when we're getting into this is stuff insidious. It happens all the time and people don't really talk about it enough. And I think our generation is used to pushing through, right?
Yes.
Oh, well, these things happen, but it's not going to stop us.
Right.
But it does some things stop us. And
Yeah.
those are things that are out of our control.
Out of our control, yes. Agreed.
So it's like you can do all the things and still not become the VP.
Yeah.
And then the mediocre white man or white woman becomes the VP, right?
Yep.
This is facts.
Yeah, these are things that...
So it's like the dance of nothing's going to stop me, but I know something could, and that's okay. But like, let's not pretend it doesn't happen.
Right. There's like a glass ceiling, right? Like we all know. Even my buddy, right? He definitely moved further up than I did because my focus, and especially like I left that organization to run my own thing, which turned out to be a better thing for me anyway, because I was making 3 or 4 times more than what they were paying me. So fuck your little title, didn't need it. But my buddy, he sat there and he moved up, and I think he became like an assistant vice president. And there were a few people like counterparts that we knew, but I mean, they had to jump through so many hoops to get there. Like I remember he was telling me, like one of our buddies, Troy, I guess, like, you know, he'd miss certain events and stuff like that with his family because he was trying to climb up that corporate ladder. So you have to do all this extra stuff that I knew I wasn't willing to do because I didn't really care about that title that much. And I knew that I could get money other ways. But it's true. That is a truth. There's a ceiling there. Even with the women that I would see there, like there were definitely like women that would be moving up that ladder too. And I remember just being in meetings, and I loved a lot of these women because I'm like, they were boss bitches. They didn't take shit, right? And I like that, right? Because I've always been around strong women, like places that I work, like all my bosses prior to being in corporate America were all women. So I'm used to strong women. So this is nothing to me. But I remember being in meetings and there would be like a female executive, and she would sit there and call out different things that she would see that, you know, then later on you start hearing people whispering, calling her a bitch and all this other nonsense. And I'm like, but if so-and-so would have said it, it would have been fine. He would have been strong and blah, blah, blah. But because she's saying it, oh, she's a bitch and stuff like that. So I even that, like I would see, you know, obviously I saw my view from as a black man, but also just as women, like strong women that were in those spaces. And again, there weren't a lot of them either. You would see that they were treated differently. It was finding that balance. And I remember even just mentoring some of the people that were under me, like, and, you know, they happened to be women, and, you know, like we would talk about it. I'm like, you got to find that balance, right? When you're sitting there in these meetings, and, you know, and I remember her saying, she was like, but that's stupid. Like, why do I even have to do that? I'm like, that's just the way corporate America. I was like, you think I want to be sitting here and do, I was like, because they used to laugh at me. They're like, the way you are in meetings versus how we talk. I'm like, yeah, because I'm like, I've learned to kind of do this to, one, make sure that they're hearing what I'm saying, and also to get a point across and to move. I'm like, but I was just like, you got to be able to learn how to do this. And so I had like these Eastern European friends. One was Ukrainian, one was Russian, and they're very much like, I didn't realize how similar they are like with like Caribbean culture. You know how like we don't really take nonsense, and, you know, they don't want to hear excuses. They're just like, yo, just do what you got to do. And that's it. Like, why do we got to do all this extra stuff? And I used to tell them, I'm like, I agree with you. I was like, I was raised the same way, but this is a different world, right? This is a matrix where you have to sit there and learn how to communicate the way they do. And it's definitely going to be more difficult for you as a woman. And it's not fair. I was like, you see how they treat so-and-so executive when she sits there. And we all liked her. We thought she was great. But then you hear the conversations from other people and they're like, oh, we don't like her and stuff like that. And I'm like, so there's always these glass ceilings that you're trying to break and move past. And sometimes you're not going to break them, right? Because of the way corporate system is set up. It's like a good old boys club. And that's basically what it is.
Yep. Yeah. So why don't we segue a little bit into generations? So tell us a little bit, and we can all share about this, your experience with, let's call them Gen Z, maybe the younger millennials, your experience at work or with, you know, the differences in generations and what that means for us today.
So I've been fortunate in my jobs to work with the young whippersnappers, as I'll call them in this podcast. And I think that at first, you go into the mentality like, hey, you know what, I'm older than you, I know more than you, and I learned a lot from them, right? One of the things that I really like about the younger generation, and I think some people don't appreciate it and call them entitled and the nerve of them, is that unlike maybe like our parents and even us, where it's just like, all right, you got a good job, let's try to work it as long as possible, maybe retire from this place and stuff like that. Not these young whippersnappers. They'll sit there after a year, fresh out of college, wet behind the ear, and a year later passes by and they're like, hey, so let's talk about promotions and salary raises and all types of other things. And I remember sitting there hearing this the first time, and this wasn't a person I managed directly. I just remember her having these conversations. And I remember just clutching my pearls. And I'm like, girl, you just started. You haven't really done anything to be sitting there and asking that. And I'm like, and she was like, why? She was like, why do I have to wait like a certain amount of time? Like I've done good work. I've gotten, good scores in my performance reviews. Why do I need to wait like 2 or 3 years before I can move to this next level? And I'm like, you're right. Why? Why should you, right? Just because corporate says this is the path and stuff like that. And I'll tell you, a lot of those young folks, like that's something that I learned, like they don't sit there and think about like a job as like, hey, this is someplace I'm going to be for 20, 30 years. They're like, I'm going to be here as long as you continue to treat me and give me what I want. If not, I'm out. So I remember looking at their resumes, you would see like every year or two, these folks would be bouncing around. Whereas like when I grew up, that was a bad thing, right? Like you wanted to be
Yeah.
in a place for multiple years and stuff like that. So it helped me rewire how I thought. So that's one thing I learned about them. They're not willing to deal with nonsense, right? They'll sit there and quick to look at a different path and see if the grass is greener on the other side. So that's something that I've learned about the youth, right? Some of them are willing to learn from you, and some of them are not, right? Some of it know it all, right? Where they're just like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need your help, old head. I got this all figured out, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, cool. I'm just telling you, this is how it's going to happen, right? So I remember I had a person that I recently mentored when I worked at Saks. Tyler, you're my dude. Love you. Great guy, right? You could tell he came from a good family that taught him, like a mixture of like what we were raised with, but he also had his own kind of identity and stuff like that. So I remember interviewing him and just listening to him, his spiel and stuff like that. Did a lot of talking, right? A lot of talking and stuff like that. And then we eventually hired him. So I remember being in meetings with him, and you could tell he was eager to make his mark, right? And I'm like, and I loved it. I loved his enthusiasm. So I'd be in meetings or whatever, and I'm talking and I'm breaking things down. And as a manager, I'm always going to sit there and make sure that the person, that reports under me is going to shine, right? I'm going to mention them. Like, I'm not that type of manager where I'm like, oh, I did all of this and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, is my person here that did this for me, right? Like, they helped me. So what I would do in meetings is like, okay, we were working on this project. So Tyler was able to spot this and blah, 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 right? So I'd make sure that he'd get the acknowledgement. But because he was so eager to kind of prove and show himself, he would start just jumping into the conversations and just start saying things. So I'm not going to sit there and embarrass him, whatever. I'll just sit there and listen. And I'm like, and all I'm thinking in my mind is like, you're over talking. You're giving too much information that you don't need. You're actually opening up yourself to things that you may not want to do, or, opening up yourself to vulnerabilities. So it happened like a couple of times in these meetings. And one day I sat him down. I'm like, look, Tyler, I was like, I don't know if you've realized this already. I was just like, I'm always going to sit there and I'm going to give you a layup. Like, I'm going to make you shine. I promise you. I was like, I'm not that type of person. And he was like, yeah, that is true. You always do mention me. I was like, you have a habit of talking when you don't need to talk. Sometimes silence is golden, right? Just listening to what people are saying is enough, right? And what you should do, I was just like, have you ever noticed in meetings, right? I'll sit there quietly, listen, I'll jump in, and then I'll jump back out, like double Dutch. You jump in, jump back out, right? I'm not going to sit there and keep talking and yip yapping, because I was like, you've noticed this in meetings, right? How some people just talk for the sake of talking so they can hear their voice and seem like they're really smart. And we all sitting there looking at them like, this person's not smart. They're just yapping, right? Like, this meeting could have been wrapped up like 5 minutes ago, right? So I was trying to teach him that. I'm like, dude, you have to learn to sit there and listen, read the room, right? And then only speak when you have something of substance to say, and then jump back out. I was just like, a lot of times in meetings, I'm taking like mental notes. I'm like, all right, I said at least one or two things, and that's it. I don't need to say anything else after that. Whereas other people do that. I'm like, trust me. And then he started doing that, and he got really, really good. And eventually, he moved up in the company. He started doing well. People loved him. He made great relationships and stuff like that. But with the young people, what I realize is that either they're super eager and want to sit there and move really high really quickly, not necessarily always with reason, but they're just not willing to sit there and spend the time to try to grow within the company. It's just like, as soon as you're not showing me that there's a path for me to grow, they're out. Which, I used to think was a bad thing, but now I'm like, you know what? They're right. Why would you sit there and put all this time into a company that doesn't value you, and is not going to reward you? You have to sit there and find a better time for yourself and a better space for yourself. So I do notice that about them. They're more willing to explore other options. They don't have the same fear that we have in terms of like taking risks when it comes to their career. I think it also depends on the individual. Like, I don't want to sit there and generalize all of them, depending on how you were raised. Like, Tyler was raised, like, you could tell by like people that were like us, right? So he had a good balance of old school stuff and new school stuff, right? And he's doing really, really well there. And then there were some people that really did come in there being very entitled, wasn't really willing to put in the work. So I think it's just like regular life, right? Like, you have different types of people, but the one thing I do appreciate about them is like, they ask questions. They want to know why something has to be like that. So if you tell them like, hey, you can't get a promotion yet because of, it's past, it's not past a year or something like that, they'll be like, but why? Why was that established, right? And I'm like, it's a good question, right? It's not a bad question. I'm like, it is a stupid, like, why do we have this stupid rule? And why can't we do this? And I'm like, so that's one thing they're really, really good at. And then sometimes they're just not good at listening and being able to pick up on certain skills. I think we take for granted that we have people skills. We know how to communicate with people. We know how to talk to people. Sometimes they're not capable of doing that. So I had one person that I also mentored that worked for me, and she was terrified of speaking in front of other people. And I used to tell her, I'm like, look, you can't just do your work, right? Like, you really got to be able to sit there and present in meetings. It can't just be me. Like, I know I'm your boss, but I want you to have visibility with these other executives. They have to see that she's the one that's actually doing some of this work as well. It's not just Eddie. I don't want to be the face because, again, I'm not that type of manager. I want my people to shine. So I would sit there and try to put her in positions where she would have to present. And it was very, very hard for her because I think a lot of those generations, they're not used to talking, like really talking to people, and not just sitting there and typing and stuff like that. And so, I had to teach her by, kind of like trial by fire. And I would tell her, I'm like, look, you just have to anticipate. I was like, you basically can move the conversation, right? Don't sit there and say things that are going to trigger questions you're not ready to ask, right? And then also anticipate what these questions were. So this is something I used to tell them, all of them, right? When we sit there and present something, right? Now we got to put on the hat of the executive that's listening to what we're saying, right? And this is something that they thought was really amazing because, again, they don't have those type of skills. And I'm like, and we'd be in the meetings, and then the executive would ask the question that I prepped them for. And they're like, wow, I didn't really think that was going to, I'm like, yeah, because I'm trying to think like my audience, right? I'm not just absorbed in myself, which is part of their problem sometimes. They just think of their own little world. They're not really sitting there and thinking about like how other people would be viewing situations. So that's something else that, you got to kind of teach them, that like, step outside of yourself and think about your audience and what other people might say, not just what you want or what you think is going to happen. And that's something else that I see that comes with time, and I think is a generational thing that's a little different.
I think also the generational part, which is what you just mentioned about the social skills of communicating. I've also seen kids in that generation ghost jobs, and it's fine. You don't want to work there, don't work there. But like the 2-week notice, no 2-week notice. I'm not saying, like you said, I don't want to generalize, but whereas we were like, no, you need to give 2 weeks notice. I mean, unless they really treat you badly, you're going to give at least 2, sometimes a month notice, depending, or just really the conversation of, hey, I, resigning, here's my letter. And not all do that.
Yeah, well, but let me push back on that, right?
You won't become rehirable if you ghost a job.
Here's the issue with that.
Bad. Hey, they deserve it.
I felt, and I know I wouldn't do it because I think it's bad form. And like you said, I don't like burning bridges. Like, I could call anybody in my old jobs and I can get a recommendation from them because I didn't do them dirty like that. I do get what they're saying, especially as someone that's been laid off many times in corporate America. You sit there, you do right by them. And I can tell you, like, the times I've been laid off where I was just like, it just came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden you get a phone call, you don't get a 2-week notice, right? They sit there, they say like, hey, you're laid off. Next thing you know, your email, everything is cut off, right? So and again, this is the type of questions that they would ask me, right? They'd be like, why? Why do I have to give them 2 weeks notice when you've told me watch out for these cats because they can just lay you off like that. Why do I have to show them that type of grace? And they don't show that to us. I didn't really have a good answer for that, right? Like I could sit there and say like, yeah, you don't want to burn bridges and blah, blah, blah. Their whole argument is just like, I will never be here again. I will never work for this person again. I have you as a referral. I know you're referring me. I'm like, yes, I will. But I'm like, and so it was hard for me to kind of explain the reason of not to do that. Like, I know I don't do that because I was raised to do that. I still don't think it's the right thing to do. But as someone that's been laid off, I was like, they didn't show me that grace. They were just like, hey, so we had some budget cuts and you got to go. And then that's it.
Because they can.
Right? Like they're right for asking that question.
I mean, if you mistreat me, I would just bounce. But I mean, I feel like if you're in an okay situation, I don't know. I just think, well, maybe that's our own brainwashing, the way we were raised. It's like, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
One paycheck. Right. It's like if you had an okay experience and it's time for you to move on.
I think that's fair.
I'm leaving in 2 weeks.
Agreed.
Not a long time.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think if you have a bad experience, I could totally understand.
I mean,
why
if you're
going to
mistreat me, then I can see it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, nurses have to give 4 weeks.
I've given 4 weeks. It's hard to find social workers and therapists and Spanish speaking. Like I had a lot of guilt in my last, I'm in private practice, but before that, with the job that I had, I was the only Spanish, like many times we're the only Spanish speaking person. And there was no urgency to replace another Spanish speaking person. And I was right. And I was like, I gave a month and I'm like, I can't take that on. I'm not responsible for the fact that they don't want to do the right thing and make sure that they never did the right thing with things like that. They never gave a shit. They just wanted to mark off that someone spoke Spanish, but they didn't care about serving the Spanish population, the Spanish speaking population. And so, I mean, that became very apparent over the years. So I was like, I can't take this on. I can't take it on that. I know that when I leave, they're not going to care about hiring another Spanish speaking therapist. And that is exactly what happened. But I had to come to terms where it's like, that's not your problem.
That's not your problem. Right.
It's unfortunate, but it's not my problem.
Right.
So.
Well, I'll tell a funny story. I had a client I had someone who was a social worker and was starting out. She had just graduated maybe a year before we started working together. And she was getting paid a certain amount and it was less hours and all benefits. And it was a good thing. And me and Miss Ellis grew up in a time when, not grew up, but when with a master's degree, we're getting paid in peanuts. And now this girl's here like demanding more. And I'm like, that's what we want. And I remember feeling some type of way, like, you should be grateful for what, oh my God, what am I thinking?
What are you
know what I mean? Like the programming. And I'm like, no, she's amazing.
Right.
She should. And this is what I say about the younger generation. Sometimes something can look like entitlement, sometimes something, but how is it going to change? Same thing with race in the corporate America. Our cultures are used to pushing through, okay, there's racism. Yeah. All right. Well, you can't prove it. So am I going to go to HR and then what? They're going to come after me and have been conditioned to push through because you need to work. But the younger generations are more like, and I'm glad, are more like, I'm not putting up with this. I had a friend who told me, Christina, if you're watching, she will write to HR. She will write to the person with the racial innuendo. And she will write to have it on paper, to show it to HR or to show it to her boss's boss, which is a wonderful thing because we have allowed this for too long. So they have to, I mean, how is it ever going to change?
Yep.
And I know my husband, Jose, was passed over. He was called aggressive, and it's just all the things. And he was great like you, Eddie. He was like, oh, well, whatever. What are you going to do? Because you don't want it to take over you. But at the same time, we're just so conditioned. Same thing with social workers, white women are the ones that screwed us, and it wasn't white men. So it's like we were screwed in a profession because we spoke Spanish, and we would be told. I was told things like, well, you didn't go into social work for money, so you need to deal with it. Oh, bitch, what? I have 20 more clients than you do. How is that fair? And I don't get paid any more than you do. Like, I don't get paid for it. And this is something that we ate. And now that I'm like in a seasoned position with my own practice, I'm more vocal about it. And I'm meeting so many other therapists of color who say, yeah, that happened to me too, because we were always the only one in the agency that were treated that way. And we sucked it up. What are you going to do? I'm not going to translate. Screw that person. I'm not going to translate. But meanwhile, I have more work than you. I have 20 more clients a month than you. Like that's a big difference. So I think like you shut up, you dealt with it, you kept it moving. This is how it is. And we need the younger people to say, fuck that. We're not putting up with this anymore. But this is not acceptable.
think about what you just said there too, right? You said that you started your own practice, right? I find that with corporate America, and this is just life in general. Like me, and my brother, my friend Julie always talk about this. It's about finding a balance because, and I know what Jose went through in terms of that because I know I've been there too. Because there's this, like, just as a black man, right? There's always this perception that like you're angry and you're aggressive and blah blah blah. So you're finding a balance with, which is annoying and it's fucking exhausting, with making sure that you don't come off so intimidating that they're scared of you and it stops you from making your money, right? Which is it's freaking exhausting. It's a lot of effort. But you're also sitting there and thinking to yourself, which is probably what Jose's thinking too, is just like, I got kids to feed compared to like what my parents went through in terms of like the work that they had to do, right? And I think all of us had parents that basically were blue collar that had to do like really difficult things to kind of sit there and make sure that we all went to the schools that we did and ended up in college and stuff like that. So when I used to sit there and deal with those type of situations that you're talking about, right? I would sit there and think about my dad who would sit, or my mom too, who'd be cleaning up after patients, being a cab driver. They did like literally everything when they first came to this country. And here I am in corporate America. I'm at a desk dealing with like their BS microaggressions, whereas my dad and my mom were like breaking their back. My dad was doing overtime. I hardly saw my dad because he was always working overtime. So I'm like, should I have to deal with this? No. Is this smaller compared to the nonsense that they dealt with? Yes. Right. And then you find ways to kind of push back in a balanced way, right? Because I mean, you could sit there and crash out, right, and just go full blown, but you have to be able to have a backup plan, right? So like for me, I know when I first went in there, like that was kind of my attitude. I'm like, F them. I'm like, I'm not sitting there and trying to, dance around for these folks and stuff like that. Cause I'm like, I'm not trying to be here. I was like, I had another plan, which was true. I still had that, right? And that's something that I think has helped me with corporate America. I've always been like a side entrepreneur. So I always had my own money. So even if I wasn't getting the promotions that I felt that I should have had, and titles I never really cared about, I just really cared about the money. But even if you weren't paying me the money that I was supposed to get, I knew I can get it on my own with my own business. So it made me less vested in the system. But to your point, Melissa, for the system to change, you do need people in there that are like, you know what? I'm gonna call you out on this. And yes, you know what? I'm gonna have to be the angry black man or the angry black woman and stuff like that. And there were definitely times where I would do that. I didn't feel like I needed to turn it on, but there'd be times where someone would say something really, really slick. And now I'm like, all right, well, you want to do that, right? And I tried the professional way. Now you're going to see the angry black man, right? I'm going to make you very uncomfortable now, right? Because you have mistake the real world for this corporate world, right? And now I need to remind you what this is. I'm like, so that you sit there and you treat me appropriately. So there's systematic stuff that you're talking about that requires a lot more stuff. And then there's interpersonal things where I would sit there and address it in a different way because I was like, I don't care what this is. I'm like, just as a man, I just can't accept you treating me like this because of whatever title that you have. So I think it's trying to find a balance also and trying to find out. And I think that's why you find so many people that have like side hustles now, right? Because they kind of realize like what this game is. Some people are more willing to play with it than others. Other people were like me, where I'm like, all right, I'm just using this to kind of build something else. So you got to find like the path that works for you. Not everyone's going to be, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Some people are going to have to sit there and build their own things and target other people, like how you're doing with your profession, Melissa, right? Instead of sitting there.
I said it. I said I'm never going to allow anybody
There you go.
in any system related to therapy or social work to take advantage of me again. And if you are a Spanish speaking social worker, it's 2025, maybe it's changing. I'm hoping it's changing. You are going to be taken advantage of. Facts. So I think that, and then you're going to be gaslit to think that, you got the job and,
exactly.
And you should be grateful that blah, 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 whatever. And so the private practice was my way of rebelling and saying, I'm going to do me and I'm not going to let anybody mistreat me again in that way.
Agreed.
With its own challenges, but I can say that that's true.
Yep.
Nobody's really mistreating me, and I have say. So I mean, it's a dance. It's a dance, like you said. It's not, if you are perceived as the angry black man, black woman, the feisty Latina, which I have been called by the which my coworkers would be crying at meetings, and the one time I speak up, I'm called the feisty Latina. I'm like, okay, great, thanks, Karen. So those things are just
proud.
that happen, and I think that. You're right. Like, do I want to deal with the headache of HR and getting anyone and then having retaliation on me
Yes.
No, so I mean, I'm glad the younger people are speaking up because that's a bigger way for it to change rather than individually
And I
necessarily.
like that about them. They're also young enough, don't have the same type of responsibilities where some of us have to find that balance. But that's why, like, when they would sit there, I'm like, have at it, go do it, right? Like I remember sitting there talking to the person that worked under me. He was just like, I want to speak to so and so. I'm like, go. I was like, because I already spoke on your behalf. Go advocate for yourself. I'm with it. Do what you want. Go and sit there and speak for them. And that's how things change, right? Because then I remember they would sit there and see. They're like, yo, why are we losing so many people? I'm like, because of the stuff that they're talking about. Like they literally told you why. And you guys need to make the adjustments. Either you make the adjustments or you're going to continue to lose young talent like that. So I totally encourage it. I think it's good. Again, everything that we talk about, find the balance, right? I was like, you can't sit there and also go to work and think, all right, well, I'm having a rough day, and everyone around you has to tiptoe around you. That's not how real life works, right? Like you could sit there and take a sick day if you want, but you're gonna have to learn how to sit there and work in spaces where you're not always in the best space and stuff like that. You can't always have an excuse for everything as to why you can't do something. So that's something I always try to teach them too, right? Like you got, I get that you need this and you want this, but sometimes the world doesn't give you this and that, right? Either you sit there and suck it up and do what you got to do, or you just leave and try something else. But just don't expect that the world's always going to appease you and care about your feelings. Like I'm your manager, I care, I hear what you're saying. I'm like, but that whole corporate institution, they don't care about none of that. None of the stuff that you just told me about, they could care less about that. So again, everything is about balance. Everything in terms of relationships, work, you find a balance that works.
It's not over. Join us next week for part 2 of episode 4 with Eddie with a Y.